Dear participants of the conference, my name is Alexander Khizhniak. I'm presenting Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. It is my honor to welcome all of you with the third day of our conference. I see a lot of familiar faces as well as I could observe new participants that joined just recently, and we all welcome all of you for our third day of our big event. Today we are opening our conference with a keynote address from Frank Geary. I hope I pronounce it correctly. Frank, please correct me, and I'm sorry. He is the director of Scholars at Risk Europe. It is a European office of the Global Scholars at Risk network hosted at the Maynooth University in Ireland. Scholars at Risk is an international network of institutions and individuals whose mission is to protect scholars and promote academic freedom. Scholars at Risk Europe launched at the event at the European Parliament in November 2018. Establishment of SCAR Europe represents the culminations of nearly 2 decades of partnership between European higher education institutions and the Global Scholar at Risk network. Frank is a civil society leader working in human rights, education and culture. Prior to joining SAR, Frank was the director of the Irish Development Education Association, a leading national network of over 120 civil society organizations and activists which has changed the policy landscape, creating an award-winning code of good practice and develop a national strategic vision for global citizenship education. He was a member of Ireland's National Steering Group on Education for Sustainable Development. He has advocated for education and human rights to the United Nations, European Union, and Irish government. Before IDEA, Frank served progressively as the International Program Director and Interim Co-Executive Director at PEN International. He supported PEN International in over 70 countries to develop regional networks and programs for human rights, freedom of expression, and civil society. Today, our morning keynote address by Frank is titled as Scholars at Risk, Academic Freedom and Peace Building. It's my honor to give a floor to Frank Geary. Please, Frank.
Thank you very much, Alexander. The first question, I'll start with the basics. Can you see and hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Always important to check these basic things, especially in these days of being on mute and so on. So thank you very much for the very kind introduction, Alexander. I really appreciate it. And thank you to you and to Dr. Seidel, Katja, for inviting me to be part of this important conference. I'm really delighted and honored to be speaking with you at the Aurora Peace Conference. And I send my apologies for not being able to join you in person due to a family illness. So I'm very happy to be speaking with you here in this way. As Alexander has said, I'm Frank Geary. I'm the Director of Scholars at Risk Europe. And this morning I will be discussing our work, the work of the Scholars at Risk network, with a particular focus on the importance of scholars, academic freedom and higher education in peace building. And within that, I'll highlight the really essential role that academic freedom plays within peace building, as well as actions which higher education institutions can take to support scholars at risk worldwide. In terms of how I will go about this, I will speak in particular about 3 key aspects of the role of academic freedom and higher education in peace building. And these will be the space for disagreement and debate, which connects very closely with academic freedom, the space for respite and protection, which connects very closely and directly with the protection work of the Scholars at Risk network, and the space to pursue learning, knowledge, and ensure the circulation of knowledge, which connects very closely with the work of the Scholars at Risk network and our focus on learning. And then I will finish up by just highlighting some examples of actions which higher education institutions can take to support scholars at risk worldwide. And these will also be incorporated through my remarks. Just by way of terminology, one of the every area has its acronyms, as you all know very, very well. And within Scholars at Risk, we sometimes use the phrase SAR as an acronym for our work. So if you hear me saying SAR, you'll know what I'm talking about. I will try and avoid it. I usually try and avoid acronyms if I possibly can. So firstly, just a couple of words about Scholars at Risk. So Scholars at Risk is an international network of higher education institutions and associations, and our mission is to protect threatened scholars and promote academic freedom. By arranging temporary academic positions at member universities and colleges, Scholars at Risk, we offer safety to scholars facing grave threats so that scholars' ideas are not lost and they can keep working until conditions improve and are able to return to their home countries. Scholars at Risk provides advisory services for scholars and hosts. We campaign for scholars who are imprisoned or silenced in their home countries. And we monitor attacks on higher education communities worldwide. And we provide leadership in deploying new tools and strategies for promoting academic freedom and improving respect for university values everywhere. You will see in this slide an indication of the Scholars at Risk network. Network is a really key word that you'll be hearing throughout my presentation, because being a network is absolutely crucial to what Scholars at Risk is and how we operate. We're both structured as a network, but most importantly, we act as a network. There are more than 600 institutions in over 40 countries who are currently members of Scholars at Risk. And there are 17 national Scholars at Risk sections. And these are sections that organize the work of Scholars at Risk at the national level. They connect the Scholars at Risk members within their context. They coordinate communications, and they also connect with the global SAR network and with other colleagues elsewhere. There are three key areas of our work which you can see here, and today I'll be discussing them. Our focus on advocacy for academic freedom, our focus on the protection of researchers who are at risk, and our focus on learning. And I will also speak about, as I mentioned, our role as a network and the importance of that. The first area and the first, I suppose, frame through which I'd like to look at this topic is the space for disagreement and debate. And this connects very, very closely to academic freedom. Academic freedom is really at the heart of this. As I'm sure has been discussed throughout this conference, peace is more than the absence of conflict. Peace requires spaces for disagreement and debate in the pursuit of knowledge and truth. And this is one of the places where universities come in. And this is where academic freedom really comes to the fore. A key difference between academic freedom and freedom of expression is this focus on the pursuit of knowledge and the pursuit of truth. And this is fundamental to peace building. Peace building and maintaining peace require this space that academic freedom and universities create. Peace building requires a process for disagreement and debate. And there can be no peace without systems for recognizing and reconciling competing claims on truth. This skill set of universities is essential for this. Presenting positions, weighing evidence, analysis of evidence, dialogic and discursive approaches, convincing, not forcing, engaging deeply and openly with complexity, accepting and acknowledging the complexity, exploring and understanding complexity in pursuit of knowledge and of truth. So these skills and approaches are at the heart of your work as academics, regardless of discipline, regardless of location. And that process for disagreement and debate is a central aspect of peace building and of higher education. That exploration of complexity is essential to both peace building and higher education. And academic freedom is the university value which enables this and which is central to this. It's both, in this context, a tool and a value which enables and creates the space for peace building. As a tool, academic freedom creates the space and the ability to present and to explore conflicting truths and complex, indeterminate issues. Without academic freedom, it would not be possible to articulate, present, challenge, or explore conflicting ideas. In particular, ideas which do not adhere to the norm or which challenge consensus. Academic freedom in higher education is an essential tool in this context. And it's also, as I mentioned, a central value. In the wider context, academic freedom is a fundamental value of higher education, as it both enables academic exploration for universities and represents an ideal, a value which all institutions need to aspire to and enshrine across their operations and their work. And this is why in Scholars at Risk, we focus on promoting and defending academic freedom through our advocacy work and through our education and learning efforts, because it's at the heart of higher education and democratic values and peace building. And I will at this point elaborate some of that work that Scholars at Risk does in terms of advocacy. But before I do, I just wanted to add a note about this aspect of truth and truth seeking. So one of the things we're exploring currently within Scholars at Risk is what is the machinery of truth seeking? Over many years, professions, disciplines, institutions, and systems have been developed to encourage, support, and protect truth seeking, especially against outside interference. These include scholars in universities, journalists and media companies, lawyers and court systems, and so on. Each has their own process of truth seeking, questioning, collecting information and evidence, and measuring, as these have been developed and tested against facts and realities over many centuries. So collectively, we could describe these as the machinery of truth seeking, without which it would be impossible for people to access the facts and reality-based information necessary to inform the decisions that affect their lives. And Scholars at Risk's programming is focused on the truth-seeking machinery of the higher education sector, while we partner with truth seekers and defenders across many sectors. And this is an area that we are increasingly exploring in our work at Scholars at Risk. So I hope that there will be further opportunities to discuss this with you and to learn more about your thoughts on this area and on how we can and should be approaching this area. So in terms of our advocacy around academic freedom, I'll point to a couple of key areas and key actions that we focus on. The first is monitoring of attacks on academic freedom. And I'll speak in a moment just about our Free to Think report, which is a really key tool within this. The second is advocating for imprisoned scholars. advising university students in advocacy efforts, but also advising institutions and host institutions. And then key to this is demanding accountability and action through international, supranational, regional, and interstate systems. The Scholars at Risk's Academic Freedom Monitoring Project is a really key part of what we do when it comes to the monitoring side of academic freedom. Our staff and volunteer researchers around the world identify, document, and report on attacks on higher education. And the reason we do this, it's about raising awareness, it's about generating data-driven advocacy. And as we all know, there is a huge emphasis on evidence-based policy. So it's very much speaking to that agenda. It's about increasing protection for scholars, students, and academic communities. One of the things that we find in Scholars at Risk, and in my previous work with Penn International, always found is that by drawing attention to a case or to a situation that can provide additional protection, not in all cases, but in many cases, for those who are at risk. And finally, it's about promoting respect for academic freedom and higher education values. A key aspect of this is, and a key illustration of it, and I'd encourage you to go and take a look on our website at the report, is the Free to Think report. This is an annual report that we produce from the monitoring project and the monitoring work that we do. In 2024, you'll see there were 391 incidents of violent attacks on higher education communities. There were 91 incidents of wrongful imprisonment, 162 incidents involving attacks on student expression. And I should emphasize that these are the incidents that we recorded through the Academic Freedom Monitoring Project. That is not necessarily the full and whole picture. It's an indicative picture of the state of academic freedom and of risk for scholars. There are some key trends within this: the erosion of norms in democratic countries, threats to university by democratically elected authoritarians. The nature of the attacks on higher education that we see involve several different aspects. There are violence, killings, and disappearances. There are cases of imprisonment, cases of prosecution, cases of loss of position, cases of travel restrictions, and other areas and other aspects. A key finding from Free to Think 2024 is that attacks on higher education are happening everywhere, across all world regions and across a wide range of different countries and contexts. So why does this matter? Why are we doing this? Attacks on higher education did not just harm the immediate individual, they have a chilling effect that erodes democracy by stifling intellectual inquiry and the free exchange of ideas. As training grounds for evidence-based discourse, universities are one of democracy's and peace building's foundational institutions. Universities are essential to a free society, as essential as a free press or an independent judiciary. And this is something that the UN and UN special rapporteurs on freedom of expression have acknowledged. Attacks on higher education and authoritarianism compound each other. Attacks are more likely in authoritarian environments, and attacks erode democracy, further entrenching authoritarianism. And so this is why attacks in liberal states must be taken seriously, so that they do not go unaddressed and contribute to a similar erosion of democratic values. One of the key issues that has come across within the Free to Think report and within our work on monitoring is the impact that conflict is having on academic freedom. Violent attacks have occurred in new and ongoing conflicts. There has been crackdowns on dissent within authoritarian states by forcibly dispersing, arresting, or prosecuting scholars and students. States have introduced and passed and implemented legislation and policies that undermine academic freedom and universities. And we've also reported a higher proportion of attacks in democratic countries, in particular, a higher proportion of loss of position cases than in prior years. When it comes to the impact of conflict on this, I'm just, in the next couple of slides, we'll show a few examples of this. In Sudan, more than 100 Sudanese universities have been severely damaged or entirely destroyed, mostly through intentional targeting or looting. In Ukraine, higher education has continued even as Russian shelling destroyed 1 in 5 higher education institutions. In Myanmar, after 3 years of conflict, the country's university population has shrunk by 90% from pre-coup levels. In Israel and Gaza, Hamas's October 7th attack traumatized Israel's higher education communities. And by January 2024, Israel's military attacks in Gaza had destroyed the last remaining university. So the impact of conflict is absolutely key in relation to Scholars at Risk's work and advocacy around academic freedom. And as I discuss more, we will also see how that connects with peace building and the work that we support through academic freedom when it comes to peace building. The next couple of slides just show some key actions that are possible to take through the Scholars at Risk network. And when it comes to the point about actions that higher education institutions can take, these are a few examples that I will share. All of these show and are based on Scholars at Risk operating as a network. And they're also showing Scholars at Risk working as a network and collaborating with the wider community that focuses on academic freedom. Firstly, the Scholars in Prison project. This is a project that coordinates activities on behalf, advocacy activities on behalf of scholars and students facing prosecution and imprisonment. And they connect, in the interest of time, I won't go into huge detail on this, but very happy to elaborate further if people have additional questions. But essentially, they focus on a range of advocacy in coordination with scholars' families, with legal counsel, and with partner organizations in order to raise awareness of key cases that are appearing. This is very much based on the principle that the NGO Frontline Defenders speaks of, where they speak of protect one, empower 1,000. The student advocacy seminars are another key aspect of this, and these are seminars that involve faculty-led human rights research and advocacy at Scholars at Risk member institutions. So they're very much connecting the work that you are doing within your academic institutions with the wider Scholars at Risk network and the wider campaigning that we are doing. They focus on conducting research on advocacy for scholars in prison cases, and they involve collaboration across seminars with partner organizations, with families, and with others. And in many cases, they connect with for-credit courses as well as hybrid and other models. And just to note that there is a European Student Advocacy Days that are currently being discussed to potentially take place in Innsbruck and with MCI Innsbruck in February of 2026. So I would hope that there will be opportunities to link and connect with all of you, or those of you who are based in Austria, on this. Finally, then, the academic freedom legal clinics. And these are seminars that encompass faculty-led human rights research and legal analysis at Scholars at Risk member institutions. So again, it's very much connecting the work of the institutions with the wider work of the network, and enabling both students and faculty to connect with global campaigns for academic freedom and for specific scholars who are at risk or are imprisoned. Another key thing that, as well as working at the institutional level, as well as working at the campaigning level, one of the things that we focus on is intergovernmental organizations. And that's where this project, the principles for the implementation and the right to academic freedom, which have been developed and delivered over the last few years, has really come in. This is very much focused on the United Nations, and there was a group that was convened by Scholars at Risk of international experts who came up with this set of 9 principles for the implementing of the right to academic freedom. They have been endorsed recently by the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to education in her report on academic freedom, which was published in September 2024. And you'll see here the principles really are just core ideas of what is needed in order to implement academic freedom. And the UN Special Rapporteur recommended that all UN member states should be looking at these and implementing these across their legislative programs within their countries. Again, I won't, in the interest of time, I won't kind of dwell on these in detail, but you'll have a chance to look at them. But maybe just one point to really highlight that comes out strongly from this is that academic freedom is a human right. It's available to all persons when they're exercising academic functions. It's not a guild right that's limited to particular titles. It's really across academic functions. It is protected by existing legal standards, but these require elaboration and implementation. And it includes key things like university autonomy, access to information, movement, freedom of movement and association, as well as applying both intramurally and extramurally in terms of expression within universities and within university systems, but beyond engagement with the public as well. So the next key frame with which I'd like to look at the connection between academic freedom, Scholars at Risk, and peace building is the idea of space for respite and protection. Peace building and maintaining peace requires, as we've discussed, that space that academic freedom and universities create. But that space does not physically have to be in the place where conflict has been taking place. Universities and higher education system and culture are global and international, and this is central to the work of Scholars at Risk. Universities anywhere can, with care and sensitivity, create spaces for dialogue in the pursuit of knowledge and truth that are needed. And universities anywhere can host scholars from any part of the world. And this is where the protection model of Scholars at Risk comes in. We, in doing this, are using the model for hosting scholars that's been in place for centuries in order to host those scholars who are most at risk. In many ways, you could say that the work of the Scholars at Risk network connects with something that's both historical and contemporary, and that is the idea of the university as both a place of sanctuary and a place of learning. The Scholars at Risk model enables scholars from conflict zones to find protection and to continue their research and academic work. And in doing that, our model connects into the global network of universities, that long tradition and practice of fellowships and exchange between universities. And it uses this to enable scholars who are most at risk to find respite and to continue their work. Many of our fellowships today are resulting from conflict. Conflict has become a really significant driver of at-risk scholars. And in enabling scholars from conflict zones to find protection and to continue their work, Scholars at Risk contributes to the ongoing work of peace building. Some Scholars at Risk fellows will be actively involved in peace building during their fellowships. That might involve spreading the word about conflicts in their country and educating international audiences. It could be connecting with diaspora communities, supporting others who are in country and working towards peace. And just by the very act of continuing their research, scholars contribute towards a hope for peace and the collective construction of the possibility of peace. Other scholars who've been part of and continue to be part of the Scholars at Risk program will contribute to peace building after their fellowship. This might be through post-conflict engagement in peace building. It could be through contributions to rebuilding efforts. And oftentimes what we see is that scholars working within SAR fellowships are focused in their academic work and their scholarly research on peace building and rebuilding after conflict. For example, among the MSCA for Ukraine fellows who are currently being supported by a project that involves a consortium across Europe, of which SAR Europe is the lead partner, we've seen that many of the researchers involved have focused their research on post-conflict contributions to Ukraine. So by enabling scholars to continue their work despite conflict and threats, by enabling scholars to work in safety, to contribute to the collective construction of peace, and perhaps most fundamentally, by enabling scholars to be scholars. So Scholars at Risk, or SARS, protection work and fellowships contribute to peace building. And again, I will just give you some examples of how this works in practice. In terms of our protection, over 300 threatened scholars worldwide are provided with sanctuary and assistance through Scholars at Risk every year. Our work focuses on protecting scholars suffering grave threats to their lives, liberty, and well-being by arranging temporary research and teaching professions and by providing advisory and referral services. There are several steps which can be taken by scholars and by institutions in relation to this. Work at Scholars at Risk, we support both scholars and host institutions through this process. That includes an initial evaluation, determining how the network can help and support. It includes looking at hosting and supporting institutions around hosting academic positions within network institutions. It involves advice and assistance in terms of relocation, integration, adjustment, academic mentoring, and practical mentoring. One of the things we encourage host institutions to do is to have both an academic mentor and an administrative practical mentor in place for those fellows who are part of the protection program. And then also transition once the end of the period is reached, support with that aspect of things. When it comes to institutions, there are a few things that we recommend, and this is something that higher education institutions can do, is to think about if you're not already engaged in hosting Scholars at Risk, to think about joining the network and engaging or putting in place fellowship programs to enable Scholars at Risk to be part of your university community. And we can provide support a lot as part of this. There are various things that we recommend: contacting SAR staff, building a committee. It's very much a community-based approach. So building a committee and building support within the institution for at-risk researchers. And then thinking about how your institution can best support a scholar, whether that's a particular academic discipline that you can focus on and support, whether it is particular academic training and expertise that your institution has in place, and that there will be a good match in order to provide. And this is something that the Scholars at Risk protection team can provide support on. And I think I've covered most of the pieces here, so I won't dwell on this particular slide. But this just gives you a sense of some of the things that Scholars at Risk's protection work includes: that applications and referral parts, the support with academic appointments, the support with transition, and the growing a network of support. And as I mentioned earlier, this idea of network is absolutely key and central to what we do and how we operate. One specific example of this that I'll very briefly note is the MSCA for Ukraine program, which is currently taking place. And this is involving a consortium that includes the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, the European Universities Association, and Scholars at Risk Europe. And it's a EU, European Commission funded program that supports scholars and academics from Ukraine and provides fellowships and other support for the scholars from Ukraine. You can see some of the details and information about this program on the screen. There are currently 125 fellows who are being supported through this initiative, with a further 50 who will be, during the course of spring 2025, invited to be part of the program and offered fellowships. And it covers all domains of academic endeavor. It's not limited to particular domains, but it covers all domains and all aspects. So the third frame that I just wanted to look at when it comes to peace building, academic freedom, and scholars at risk is the space to pursue learning, knowledge, and the circulation of knowledge. As mentioned, and as I'm sure has been discussed in the last few days, peace building often requires rebuilding, and Scholars at Risk enables scholars to continue to pursue their work during conflicts and to contribute to rebuilding. This applies across all disciplines. As I mentioned in the MSCA for Ukraine program, the topics that people are working on and the focus of and specialism of the scholars involved ranges from legal to agriculture to literature and culture to right across the board in academic endeavor. And when it comes to rebuilding, and again, I'm sure this has been discussed in previous days, it involves infrastructure, but it also involves democratic cultures. It involves legal systems and all other aspects of society and state contexts. Universities are and can be repositories for knowledge about conflict and peace building. And again, I think this is why the Aurora conference is such an important initiative. And the space to pursue that knowledge with a focus on ensuring the circulation of knowledge enables peace building and enables rebuilding post-conflict. And this is something that's really central to what we do in Scholars at Risk. We enable this through our protection work, but fundamental to this is we enable it through everything that we do right across the work of the Scholars at Risk network. And as I mentioned earlier, being a network and acting as a network is really fundamental to what we do and how we approach things. I showed this slide earlier just to give a sense of the network and who is involved and what's involved. 600 plus institutions acting together, and that enables us to provide protection for at-risk scholars and to promote academic freedom globally. One of the key things that we say within Scholars at Risk is that Scholars at Risk is a linking project. It's not a conversion project. It's really about connecting with and working with institutions, individuals, and other supporters who can support academic freedom and who can provide support for those scholars who are most at risk. And within this, we talk about, that there's our work within the SAR office or offices, both in the US and in SAR Europe, based in Maynooth University. There is the membership and the active membership of the SAR network, but we also connect with a wider academic freedom community and a wider academic freedom movement. And that cross-sectoral approach is absolutely crucial to what we do in relation to both academic freedom, but also in relation to enabling peace building, working with civil society, working with the United Nations, working with governments, state agents, employers, industry, individuals, and anyone really who's involved and engaged and supportive of academic freedom. And we do this through our communications work, through our network, and through our focus on learning. One particular example of this in the European context is the Inspire Europe project, currently in its second iteration called Inspire Europe Plus. And this focuses on coordinating and connecting all of the actors across Europe who are either currently engaged or potentially engaged in supporting at-risk researchers. It's something that we hope to continue to build over the coming years, and the network aspect of that and the connecting aspect of that is something that we are hoping, depending on funding, we are hoping to continue to actually build more deeply on that aspect of the work within Inspire Europe and across all of our work. I won't dwell on this. One thing I might just point your attention to that you may wish to look at is in terms of models and approaches, is there was a report recently published, and it's on the SAR Europe website, on national level actions and initiatives, which provide some interesting models. There is no one-size-fits-all model. All of the approaches are different in different contexts, and that just provides some context and examples of those. Another key aspect of our work, and again, I'm looking at the clock here, so I'll very briefly cover this, is our focus on learning and education. And you can see here on this slide, there are various tools that we as SAR have, and I'd really encourage you to explore both the Scholars at Risk Europe website and the Scholars at Risk website. The URLs will come up at the end of my presentation. For these learning materials, we have a MOOC, for example, that is a very useful tool that can be used within universities. And there are various other ways and opportunities to engage. One key part of this, and when it comes to just rounding up with actions that universities can take, this is one I would really highlight, is promoting core higher education values. We have produced a thing called the SAR Values Guide, and it focuses on these key values that you can see, with academic freedom being a really important part of that for universities. It also looks at ways that universities and higher education institutions can really move beyond mission statements, move beyond statements of values, to really integrating those values across your work and across how you work. So again, in terms of actions, that's something that I would highly recommend, and I'd highly recommend exploring the values guide. So to finish up with just a few key actions that can be taken. Firstly, as I mentioned, and I've mentioned all these before, so this is really just by way of summary, to join the network and to be active in the network if you are already part of it. To put in place fellowship opportunities and hosting opportunities for at-risk scholars within your institutions as part of your university community. I can't emphasize that enough, that this is about university communities. It's about connecting and coming together and both supporting individuals, but enriching individual institutions and universities. To add your voice to our global advocacy work within Scholars at Risk and wider work around academic freedom. To engage with those specific projects I mentioned, such as the Scholars in Prison Project, the student advocacy seminars, the academic freedom legal clinics. To study and investigate academic freedom. One of the things we find is that actually there is a dearth of academic study when it comes to academic freedom. That is increasing, and there are several projects that within Scholars at Risk and within the wider community are taking place, such as the Academic Freedom Index and the Mellon Fellows project that Scholars at Risk in the US operates. To educate university communities and the public about threats to academic freedom and attacks on scholars, to look at our learning work, to engage with higher education values. So there are multiple ways that any institution can engage, and we in Scholars at Risk are here to support you in relation to that. So by way of conclusion, as I said, key three aspects that I highlighted here around the connection with peace building, academic freedom, and Scholars at Risk are that space for disagreement and debate, the space for respite and protection, and the space to pursue knowledge and ensure the circulation of knowledge. So I really hope that we will continue this dialogue, and I hope to continue to collaborate with you, all of you, in your pursuit of your shared work on peace building and on academic freedom. So thank you. And I'm not sure how much time I have left. I hope I have left sufficient time for some questions, but thank you very much for listening.